Psalms 12 and 13, and if we get there, maybe Psalm 14. So we'll see how we do. So we have Psalm 14 out there, and then we have and then 15, 16, and 17 all are Sunday morning psalms. So we'll be skipping. So we'll try to do this block of 3, and again they're all laments, all individual laments. And so in Psalm, so as you all are becoming practiced scholars of the Psalter, so how do we start this, the Psalm, how does it start for us here?
It's the complaint.
Right.
Help me.
Yes, good. It starts out with that's right. And so sometimes it's how long. And here is a direct petition, save or help, O Lord. So help me, O Lord, save me, O Lord. And then again, we have, we can hear echoes of Peter when he's in the water, right? He starts sinking and he says, save me, Kyrios, right? And in the Greek, that would be the same. That would basically, Peter is crying out the first half verse of Psalm 12. Save me, O Lord. And then we have the complaint and the provocation. So what has happened in this particular lament? What has occasioned this particular lament?
How can I be?
Everyone is lying.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's
now,
a change.
Right. It's now is this, so this is so that we have all the faithful have disappeared. They utter lies to each other. And so this is not to be mistaken with Diogenes wandering around with his lamp around the city looking for an honest man. That the faithful in this context are in a sense, the petitioner is looking for those who sustain the practice of public virtue. So in a sense, it's not necessarily an individualized complaint. It's like it's not like he's saying, because the petitioner feels that he or she is faithful and truthful. The problem is that the public virtue has disappeared, right? That there are no faithful ones, no trustworthy ones left. And it's really a complaint directed, which isn't immediately apparent from the context, but it's a complaint really directed towards those who have the responsibility for a just society. And basically, there are no faithful leaders. So if you almost want to write in, if you have pencil, you can kind of put in the insertion sign, and there are no, the faithful leaders have disappeared from humankind. They, meaning those leaders, utter lies to each other with flattering lips and a double heart. They speak.
What's the emphasis on flattery? I never. Why is? I mean, that's pretty much. I went to one at Wikipedia and they couldn't help me. So.
Yeah. So they with flattering lips and then actually in the NRSV they translated flattering lips and a double heart, which actually is a translation of what the actual Hebrew is. It says with flattering lips and a heart and a heart. And so in English they translate that as a double heart, which is actually what the Hebrew means. It's like with a heart and another heart. It's kind of like they've got two hearts in them, and they're speaking from two different places in their own selves. So we have to remember again that the heart in the kind of the Hebrew anthropology is actually the place of decision making, and so to be double-hearted is more like what we would call double-minded. They speak with two minds, and so the flattery is. You have to think of it as, in a sense, the leaders or the kind of those responsible for public justice are all basically greasing the skids with each other. They're all kind of making the backroom deals, and, you know, they're flattering each other. You do this for me, I do this for you. It's that sort of picture of public life that the psalmist is trying to conjure up. And in that context, if you don't have a leverage, if you don't have a place to grab, you're out of luck, right? If you don't have a way to get justice. And so this is the kind of the powerless petitioner saying, listen, all the people, God, all the people that you, and again, from the psalmist's point of view, it would be, from their point of view, that God would have placed, in a sense, the leadership or the public order has God's sanction behind it, right? And so if there's a disconnect between the justice of the public order and God's just will, that's a problem. And the petitioner is saying, God, you need to fix this problem. There's a difference between what we know your will is and what the leadership is doing. Linda.
Mm-hmm.
I'm cool. You explained it.
Oh, okay. There you go. So anyway, so that's right. So we have the in a sense, the faithful disappeared. There's the leadership is no longer practicing public virtue. And so what do we have? So what do we have following the provocation?
Mm-hmm.
What's kind of the next block? What's the work that the next block is doing?
Punishment.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. So it's a petition that God would make things right.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Cut off the flattering lips and the tongue that other proud. Yes, Randy.
Who are they going to punish? Am I on the wrong? Because the poor are despoiled because the needy groan.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Is he asking them to do something about that?
Well, so basically, the poor and the needy are suffering because of in a sense, those who are responsible for a just public order are distorting justice, stealing it from them, etc. So it's in a sense also if you think about in the ancient, or we just simply say pre-modern view, one's words are, in a sense, connected to deeds. That, in a sense, you don't say something that you aren't. Words and deeds have a much closer connection than in our minds. And so, for them to say to cut off all flattering lips and the tongue that makes proud boasts is to cut off their power, not just their words. So it's not just clean up their language, God. It's do something about the power that these people have to be able to speak unjustly. And the speech, again, it's more of a forensic public. It's kind of a forensic setting. That is a kind of a trial setting where they can render unjust verdicts, for example, and those words are lies because they're contrary to the truth. In a sense, of the innocent sufferer. And so that's the petition is to cut off those who say, with our tongues we will prevail, our lips are our own, who is our master? And of course the implication is it's not God, right? They're seeking their own interest and are, in a sense, functionally godless, morally godless, even if they say the right things. They think they can placate God with their speech, but God sees the heart. So it's basically stop the pride and the injustice that these folks commit. Now, in the next few verses, then, in verse 5, we have something that we haven't seen before in a psalm. So how would you characterize, in a sense, what makes this different? If your translation might help you by actually putting it in quotes. But what's going on in verse 5?
God is actually responding. I mean, he's actually like in conversation with the person. Yeah.
Yes. So if not God himself, then at the very least, what we have here is prophetic speech. So basically, this would be something that this would be a prophet speaking, and this is something actually that we this would be a role for prophets to take in the life of Israel. That is, if you remember, they probably didn't share this story with you in Sunday school. Of course, it's the story of David and Bathsheba. You know, usually you have to be an adult before you get that story. You don't want to tell 11-year-old boys about that. But so you know, David, you know, and Bathsheba, and so he you know, he gets Uriah, poor Uriah gets you know, killed, and then David marries Bathsheba, and then the prophet Nathan confronts David, right? And you know, the famous, you know, and he has that whole the parable of the you know, the little lamb and all that stuff, and then it ends with you are the man, right? Yeah. So and you know, what is fascinating about the life of Israel is that prophets that in a sense, because of their faith in Yahweh, in the Lord God Almighty, that those who spoke on Yahweh's behalf could say that sort of thing to the king and live. You know, like we know from Jeremiah that now Jeremiah did get thrown down into the bottom of a cistern, but he wasn't executed summarily, right? And also his friends rescued him in the middle of the night. They basically, the king throws him down in the middle of the, you know, down to a cistern, and his friends like lower a rope and they pull him out, and he lives. So, and then he goes, and then I don't know if it's in the book of Jeremiah, but basically, and then Jeremiah shows up at the royal court the next day. Like, you know, it's like, my friends sprung me loose, and it's like he comes back for more. And so, which is, you know, in the courts of ancient monarchs and despots, right, where the king himself is considered to be divine, right? If you think about Nebuchadnezzar and Cyrus and on all the emperors of the Eastern empires, they themselves are demigods in the view of their people. So there's nobody who can speak to them that's the boss of them. But in the life of Israel, the kings are, even King David is squarely a creature underneath the Lord God, Yahweh, right? And so the prophets have a role. And so here we have prophetic speech, and this would be something where a prophet could intercede in forensic proceedings and speak on behalf of the innocent, we would hope, right? In order to vindicate the innocent and say, thus saith the Lord, you know, this man is innocent, and save his life. So we have a prophetic speech that has become a part of the liturgy. So in a sense, it's a prophetic speech which has become incorporated into liturgy, and it's because the poor are despoiled, because the needy groan, I will now rise up, saith the Lord. You know, now in your translation probably says the Lord, but you have to hear it as a prophetic formula. So when Isaiah and Jeremiah, when Ezekiel would speak, they would, you know, prophets had to be very careful to distinguish between what they received from Yahweh and then what was their own bit, right? And you see actually St. Paul doing something like this in Corinthians when he says, now this I get from the Lord, and, you know, meaning Jesus. And then he'll say in Corinthians, now this is not the Lord, but I, Paul, say, and yada, yada, yada. And so I think it's in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, around there. And so you really see, for example, Paul wanting to clearly distinguish, now this is something from the Lord, and then this is my opinion. And so the prophets would say, you know, thus saith the Lord, to indicate this is a word directly from Yahweh. I will now rise up. I will place them in the safety for which they long. Safety also can be translated as salvation. right? I will place them in the salvation for which they long. And so you have and this is the classic, this is the Yahweh God that we know and love, right, from the Old Testament witness, which is the God who is prompted to act by the suffering of the poor.
Mm-hmm.
This is the God. I mean, so it's the clear. It's specifically. It's because, you know, if you took Latin, it'd be like the ut clause. You know, it's like, you know, that's the in order of that. But it's almost like it's because the poor are despoiled, because the needy groan, I will now rise up. And so this is the same God who in Exodus chapter 3 says, you know, I have heard the cries of my people. I have seen how the Egyptians oppress them, and I will now, you know, take them up out of Egypt. So this is the same God who is, you know, is a continuous witness. And this is, in many ways, what we would, in a sense, this is what we call the preferential option for the poor. I mean, this is passages like this, is that, in a sense, God is, the God we know in the Bible is the God who particularly is moved to act by the suffering of the poor and the vulnerable. So after this prophetic speech is uttered, what comes next? What's the appropriate response to this sort of word from Yahweh God?
And then there's an agreement with God.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Exaltation of God, and then agreement with him.
Right. Good. So, an expression of trust, like, you know, what he said, you bet, you know, and God is awesome. And it's absolutely. So it's a response of trust and faith in the God who has just spoken. And in a sense, this is what God's looking for. You know, when God speaks, this is the kind of response. And so this is what's modeled for us in the Psalms, is the response that, in a sense, is that God seeks from the faithful. The promises of the Lord are promises that are pure. And of course, this is in contrast to the words of the wicked. So, you know, the wicked's words are crooked, are, you know, oppressive, are unclean. The promises of the Lord, in contrast, are pure words. Silver refined in a furnace on the ground, purified 7 times. And of course, now 7 means it's perfectly purified, right? So if you know, you probably only need to purify it once, right? You just, like, you boil the silver and you just get you cull off the impurities from it. But it's like you boiled it 7 times. So it's a symbol of perfection and completion. And so of course, Augustine, you know, whenever he sees a number, he just goes to town on it. So, like, it's like, ooh, a number, this must mean something. And so he has not one, but 2 possible meanings. Like a preacher I know, he's just going to give you all of it. He's not going to hold back. He's just going to, like, I'm going to tell you everything I know about this passage. So he says, so purified 7 times is he makes the link to the 7 gifts of the Spirit from Isaiah chapter 11, verse 2. So that, you know, it's like a spirit of wisdom, of counsel, of understanding. And so that's the 7, the word is, and of course the word and the Spirit being linked by Augustine. And then also he'll say that, you know, that the word, and of course with the word, the promises of the Lord being spoken in words. And of course the promises of the Lord are given to us, especially in the scriptures, right? So this is an invitation to reflect on the Bible 7 times a week. Every day you should be purified by the word and the promises of God. And so it's like, you know, Augustine, you know, turns it into an exhortation to biblical study, which I think is a nice thing to point out, and is certainly a good thing to be doing. It's to take the depth of the passage there, and anything, again, whenever he comes across a metaphor that he doesn't understand, he starts digging into it, like silver refined 7 times. What does this mean for it to be 7 times? And he goes on for a couple paragraphs. So I read Augustine, so you don't have to. So I read it and then I bring it to you. It's kind of like, I kind of think of myself. This is an editorial comment. I kind of think of myself as kind of like, the guy who does, or now it's a woman who does the Daily Soup. It's like they watch all the reality shows just to bring you the funniest little tidbit. So I read Augustine in all his glory, and I bring you the best little tidbits from Augustine to apply to the scriptures. So after we have the expression of trust in the promise, then what do we get to in verse 7? How does verse 7 move us along?
How the Lord is going to fix it.
Right. Good. So you, O Lord, will protect us. You will guard us from this generation forever. And again, we should hear the echo, an echo in Jesus saying, this perverse generation asks for signs, and et cetera, et cetera. And so the generation is specifically speaking about when Jesus uses that phrase, this generation seeks for signs, he is pointing to the language of the psalmist, and the generation, the wicked generation, is of course the wicked of the psalmist, right? The rulers of the people, the leadership of the temple. And so that's the kind of the resonances that Jesus is trying to create in that saying of his. But right, you have in a sense, you have a direct answer in verse 7 to the petition of verse 1, right? So verse 1 starts out with, save, O Lord. And then verse 7, you, O Lord, will protect us. So it's a great little inclusio that is kind of a bookend between the petition and then the faith in the petition being answered. So save, O Lord, and then you, O Lord, will protect us. But then, and this is what I love about the Psalms, because they're not neat poetry in a sense of all the little ends tied up, right? And you would think, stop after verse 7, right? That's the natural place to stop. You've got a perfect little psalm there with a beginning, a middle, and an end that ties back to the beginning, but the psalmist, being real, can't help himself but to end, right, with a, and yet. It's like, and yet, is like kind of like, you, O Lord, will protect us. By the way, Lord, anytime you want to get around to protecting us, that'd be awesome, right? Because on every side, the wicked prowl, his vileness is exalted among mankind. It's kind of like anytime now, anytime, I know you're going to do it, but that would be a good time. So I love the psalmist. This is chutzpah, right? This is the psalmist reminding God that God needs to do God's job. Come on and help us out here, right? Randy.
Yeah, there's kind of a common theme here of the leadership's not doing right.
Yes.
Not just here, in other ones, and even in the next, and maybe not so much in 13, but some of the other ones.
Right.
And is this part of that whole deal where, particularly the Jews had become so rule-oriented, and they had this class, they had all these rules that nobody could, it was very difficult to follow them all.
Well, since it was more at this point, it's more, God has given us the Torah,
yeah,
which lays out a plan for justice. And basically, if the leaders would but follow Torah, we would be taken care of. So God, you gave us Torah, So now you need to come in and defend the authority of your own word. And it's asking for God to take the side of the powerless against those who should be their stewards. And I find, I mean, again, this is one of the things about, you know, Israel is God's chosen people and our spiritual forebears. That is, they preserved a record of them never really having a utopian society. I mean, and you just think about that. I mean, what people preserve, I mean, most, again, I know I bang this drum all the time, but it's so remarkable that they're, you know, I mean, for Pete's sake, I mean, we as Americans, you know, 1776, man, heroes, all of them. Isn't that awesome? 1787, the Constitution, the best document ever designed, ever in the history of human everness. And I mean, we have our golden age, right, to which we hearken back. A utopia when everybody followed the rules and everybody went to church and everything. But the Israelites, they make it absolutely clear that there was never a time when we got it right. There was never a time when we managed to do all these things. And that they preserve the record of the most vulnerable, the songs and the prayers of the most vulnerable in their community against their own authorities. And that's what gets preserved. You don't have laments of, unlike say in like Roman literature, you don't have laments of rulers saying what horrible subjects all their people are. You know, like a Seneca saying, you know, if only the commoners in Rome would, you know, stop being so vicious, we could really have a great empire. You know, you just don't have that in the Israelite scripture. It's really this, you know, witness, you know, throughout the text of, you know, we've never had it right. And even in the wilderness, when God was, you know, leading us by a pillar of fire and a cloud, you know, and the clouds and gave us the manna, even there we complained, you know, I mean, it's, and so it's, to me, that lends it a critical note of authenticity. Like, yeah, I can believe this all happened because it's so real. I mean, they don't varnish anything. They don't sand off any of the hard edges. It's really all out there for us to see. And so you have, you know, this kind of reminder that even in the midst of, and I think also it's an encouragement that it's a reminder in the Psalm that yes, we're called to have faith in God's deliverance, but that doesn't change the fact that it's still pretty crappy in the meantime. You know, and I love that. There's one of my favorite lines in Monty Python's The Life of Brian is during the Sermon on the Mount, and where you know, they're listening to Jesus give the Sermon on the Mount, and there's this woman in the crowd. You know, it's actually, you know, it's one of the men actors, but playing a woman is like, you know, and he's saying, you know, it's like, what did he say? And this guy's saying, I believe he just said, "Blessed are the meek." And then the Monty Python character goes, "Oh, well, they're getting something because they have a hell of a time." You know, it's like, you know, it's like, you know, it's like, it's this great like acknowledgement. Yes, the meek, the faithful really do have a hard time of it in this life. And by the way, in the NRSV, it translates on every side the wicked prowl. But that's an English kind of cleaning up in the translation. It's an interpretation. Augustine had more of the literal Hebrew, which is translated into his Latin. But it's on every side the wicked walk in a circle roundabout. You know, and you know, you have kind of like a, you know, something kind of circling around, and so the NRSV, those translators translate that as like in kind of a lion prowling for prey, and but Augustine read that in the sense of they're just so dumb that they just walk in circles, chasing their own tails. So the plans of the wicked will come to nothing. You know, it's like they just circle roundabout. chasing their own tails in a circle. So anyway, it just goes to show how difficult the Hebrew is to translate, and how you can really take very different things depending on how you translate it. But going on to Psalm 13. And here we have a classic lament. So, if you could summarize the first half of the psalm in 2 words, what would it be?
How long?
Yes, right. How long? That's right.
Poor me.
I'm sorry?
Poor me.
Yes, poor me. And this is actually, as much as we say individual laments, many of the, like Psalm 12, you have a first person plural. It's a we and an us are suffering. But here it really is a first person singular. It's me. It's the individual. Will you forget me forever? And in some ways, this is why the ascriptions, the traditional ascriptions to David help make sense, or help make the Psalms make sense, is that by ascribing them to David as an individual, they could then sing these songs together, if you will, kind of taking David's part. So in a sense, they can all, just like you can all, we all can kind of imagine, we can all sing love songs that are in a first person singular, even though they're not necessarily about us. We can sing along with them if we're experiencing a similar situation. That's the one thing you're going to get from me on Valentine's Day. That's it. That's my only Valentine's Day concession. So, I say, Kate and I, we're low. It's like I'm high church on Sundays, and then we're low church about just about everything else. So anyway, so it's like Hallmark holidays. It's like if it's not on here, right? I don't do it. So anyway, but although I do write Kate's birthday on my ecclesial calendar, because that is a high holy day. So I do try to cover the bases. Right. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? And so who is hinted at it being the source of the suffering?
The Lord's is source of his suffering? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, right. It's like there are no wicked, right now, at least at this point in the psalm, there are no wicked directly, that they're directly causing suffering. It's the psalmist complains directly to the Lord.
Yes.
Like, why are you coming after me? Yeah. Roxanne?
Oh, I just said his absence, God's absence.
Yes, right, exactly. Exactly. So in the absence of the Lord, it's like kind of the Lord is causing the suffering through absence, and through a failure to show up and act. How long will you hide your face from me and not disclose yourself? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day long? And then how long, and then we get to the point, in a sense, so like I've got some personal pain, but how long shall my enemy be exalted over me? So that's the problem. I've got an enemy, and he is getting the best of me. So again, here, this is something that cries out for Christianization, if you will. It cries out for, since those of us who are called to love our enemies, et cetera, et cetera. So you can all, I've done this enough times, and now how would Augustine have handled this verse? How would Augustine handle, verse 2c?
It says your enemy is your sin. Your enemy is within.
Right.
Yeah.
So that is one tack that he takes. So he spends a paragraph about that. And who else would the enemy be? Remember, so for those of you who are who are doing the thing about secularization with the bishop, so who else is the enemy out there?
The non-believer.
No. The devil.
Oh, the devil.
The devil. Yes. Don't forget. Don't forget. Say we moderns, we want to forget. but Augustine, remember Augustine is, prior to the modern age. So it's the, but Augustine does take both tacks. So Augustine will say the enemy is both our sins and our flesh and our enemy, the devil himself. And so the sorrow in my heart all the day long, in the sense that day becomes not just 24 hours, right? Or when the sun is up, the day becomes a symbol for our temporal fleshly life, right? In a sense, our mortal life in the midst of kind of fleshly suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a day, which is, again, it's a spiritualized day in a sense. So it's how long will it's a poetic way of saying, will I have pain and sorrow my whole life? It's supposed to, I think actually we have an expression like this in English, right? I've been working on the railroad all the live long day, so all the live long days. So it's a symbol for our mortal lives. So then what follows the provocation or complaint, the how long, the classic lament follows that in the structure.
The petition.
Right.
Answer me, O God.
Yes.
My eyes.
Yes. Right. Good. So we have a complaint and then a petition. So Lord, this is what's going wrong. This is what's wrong, and this is what I want you to do about it. Right. And that's the classic structure of the prayer and the petition. And this has some new and interesting imagery. It give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death. Give light to my eyes. And so again, just as a day is more than just 24 hours, is a symbolic, it's almost a synecdoche of life and life as a whole. So the eyes then are our spiritual sense of the divine presence. To give light to my eyes is to give my spiritual sense, my spiritual faculty. That would be kind of a scholastic way of phrasing it, like the faculties of this, your intellectual or spiritual faculties, but to give my spiritual faculty the sense of your presence in the midst of my suffering. That's what is being driven at by this psalm. Or I will sleep a sleep of death. And again, this is an image that Paul uses. So Paul is, when he says in Thessalonians, those who sleep in the Lord, that is a conscious not a contradiction, but a conscious contrast to the sleep of death. That is, those who have faith in Jesus, those who die in the Lord, fall asleep in the Lord instead of falling asleep into death. That in a sense, that's the difference that eternal life and hope in Jesus makes, is that in a sense and for Paul, you're going to fall asleep. Everybody falls asleep. But do you sleep in Jesus or do you sleep in death? And so for Paul, that's a word of comfort to the Thessalonians, is all those who have fallen asleep, they're asleep in the Lord. Right? They don't sleep the sleep of death, they sleep the sleep of Jesus. Which, again, we can only, of course, he doesn't, again, one of the things about Paul's letters is we don't get a whole lot of the charisma or the preaching of the narrative in any of his letters. We don't get a sense of what he would have told them about the life and death of Jesus. But in a sense, it's that Holy Saturday, right? It's the sleep of Jesus in the tomb, and that the sleep of the Christian is a sleep of is a Holy Saturday sleep that will end in an Easter Sunday. And that's Paul. Paul isn't using a euphemism for death. He's actually pointing back towards a psalmic image and drawing his theology from the Psalter and from the images of the prayers of his people. So again, I always like to point out about, and say that, like neither Jesus nor Paul were inventing, I say this because I'm a disciple of N.T. Wright, and you've heard N.T. Wright if you watch his thing say this, but they weren't developing a new religion that was different somehow in their minds from Judaism. That's our modern perspective. Our modern perspective is that you have world religions, and you have like Buddhism and Judaism and Christianity and Islam. But as far as Jesus and Paul were concerned, they were not introducing a new world religion to the stage. It was, they both are pointing back, and especially they both point back to, in addition to Isaiah and the chapters 30 through 33 of Deuteronomy, they point back to the Psalter as a primary source of their imagery and metaphors. Because that was the poetry of their people, a poetry of a suffering people. So give light to my eyes, let me know that you're there, or I will sleep the sleep of death, and my enemy will say, I have prevailed. And we can't have that. Right? God is like, kind of like, I'm your PR agent, God. And like, I've done some market testing, market research out there, and you don't want the word getting out that, it's like, help me out here, because otherwise your enemy will say, I won. Jenny, I'm sorry, I see Jennifer Dunbar on your things. It's Jenny.
Oh, I know. It seems to take it one step further, though, in the next verse, because it even talks about letting his foes rejoice.
Yes.
Shaken. That seems to be a step further than just saying, ha ha, I won.
That's right. Exactly. So it's my foes. And again, there's a difference in translation. You can translate that my foes will rejoice because I am shaken, as if it has already happened, and so God needs to fix it. Or you can translate that because has an if. My foes will rejoice if I am shaken. So it's the sense is, hey, don't let me lose.
Right.
Otherwise, my foes rejoice. Or again, the other sense of it, again, both are equally possible, but they're pointing towards the same thing, which is that the faith we have in the Psalter, which then again is brought into the flesh by Jesus, is a faith in which we are given the promise that God is in such solidarity with us that, in a sense, his honor is at stake in our vindication. That in a sense that we worship a God and know a God, especially the God we know in Jesus, who does not stand aloof from our defeats. Especially if we remember that our enemies are our sins, right? Especially if we since we go that direction and move it towards the spiritualization, that God is not untouched by our failures and our brokenness. And so that what we are given the opportunity is we're given the privilege of putting a claim on God. And to be so bold has to actually put a claim on God, because it's like, kind of, God, you said, like, you're with me. And so if you're with me and I wind up sleeping the sleep of death, if I wind up estranged from you, if I wind up with this overwhelming sense of your absence and loss, then that, in a sense, that's kind of on your tab, God, right? Not mine, because I don't have a tab. You said you were picking up the meal. You're kind of, Dad said he was paying. So, it's like, you got to throw down now. It's time to pay. And because I don't, I'm turning my pockets inside out and I've got nothing. So, don't ruin the family name by failing to come to my rescue. And that's, I mean, if you think about it, that's a bold claim to be making on God. I'm just saying. But the psalmist is bold enough to make that claim. The psalmist teaches us to make that sort of claim. It's the chutzpah of Israel's faith. It's the Abraham arguing with God. It's Jacob wrestling with God. It's Moses saying, "Oh God, you don't want to destroy the Israelites, because then the Egyptians would be happy about that, and we don't want to make the Egyptians happy, do we? No, of course you don't." So, kind of Moses making God feel like it's his idea to save, to have mercy on the Israelites. So this is the faith of Israel. It's a faith where we wrestle with God and we can push on God. And of course we have theologians to help us understand, and condition that, but yet we are called to be bold in our prayers. Mm-hmm. and to really kind of put the case to God that we are in need of rescue. So we have the petition, and then what's next? Classic structure. What's the next? What happens after the petition? Verse 5.
You have the but pivot now.
Yes,
but.
Right. But
It looks bad, but.
Now, and again, and with Paul, like for Paul, he will say, often will say, but now. Mm-hmm. And he'll have his argument, and then he'll say, but now in Messiah Jesus, and so again, Paul's own argumentation within his letters is structured by the Psalter and the turn that the Psalms can make in saying, aha, but I trusted in your steadfast love. And so it's the steadfast love, that's the classic, that's, if you want to write in pencil, if you have a pencil, you write in it. That steadfast love is chesed, H-E-S-E-D, chesed. That's a key word in the Psalms. It is God's loving kindness, his steadfast love, his mercy. It's translated in all those ways. It's a fundamental part of God's disposition towards humanity, chesed, steadfast love. That we know in Jesus. Ultimately, Jesus is the ultimate expression of God's chesed. In a sense, for God so cheseded the world that he gave his only begotten son. Don't use that in Scrabble and it would offend your Jewish friends. But anyway, but you know what I'm saying. Grammar was never my strength in Greek or Latin class. I couldn't do grammar. So it's like, vocab, yes, but don't make me do like first, second, third persons. So the trust in God's steadfast love accomplishes that for which it hopes. In a sense, it's the trust actually makes it happen. But I trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. You see how that there's a little, in a sense, the trust is so complete in the psalm that future salvation is regarded as an already accomplished fact. See that in verse 6, how I will sing to the Lord. So therefore the deliverance is in the future, but then it follows up immediately with, because he has dealt bountifully with me. So there it seems like the deliverance is in the past. But in the perfect trust of the faithful psalmist and the follower of Jesus, right? In that perfect trust, future and past come together into a present experience of redemption. And so we give thanks to God for what he will do that's already been accomplished. And that's that in the psalmist, in a sense, for example, is in a sense, the cross and Jesus' sacrifice on the cross and the forgiveness given to us is a past event, which has a future result, our eternal life in the kingdom of God, which, because we believe in it, we trust in it, it becomes something we experience today. And that day, which earlier in the psalm was the day of kind of mortal travail, right? All the livelong day, that day after we respond to God's deliverance in trust, that day becomes the eternal present in which we live in the joy of God's victory, that we already begin to give God thanks for, a future victory for which we give God thanks in the present. So it's a really beautiful ending. In some ways, it's kind of like, well done, psalmist of Psalm 13. That was a good ending to a psalm, better than Psalm 12. So, if I do say so myself. But it is a beautiful turn and reversal of the psalm, which ends with song, with actual singing to the Lord. All right, so we got 5 to 7 minutes. So we have yet another individual lament, but a somewhat different one. So what's the provocation in Psalm 14?
It's the unbelievers.
Right, and what particular kind?
Well, the corrupt, bad people, but they do it because they say there is no God.
Right.
Yeah.
The fool says in his heart.
Yeah. So take me through that again. You got fools, you've got enemies, you've got
right. The wicked.
Okay. The wicked.
The rich.
Okay.
You know, it's like, it's kind of like, I like the old joke, Eskimos have like 17 different words for snow, and the psalmists have a whole lot of words for bad people. It's like they are really acquainted with all the various kinds of bad people there are in the world.
Right. Right. But this is almost setting up the punchline, because because they say in their hearts there is no God. What are they? They're fools. They're not bad people. They're not enemies. They're just flat out fools.
They are
from the get-go, because they say in their heart of hearts there is no God.
Right. They are corrupt. They do abominable deeds. And so actually in the spirit of, I'm just grabbing my volume of St. Augustine's commentary on the Psalms. So because in light of, again, the class we did with the bishop on Wednesday about secularism, and we talked about how it was impossible to imagine, like the social imagining, it was impossible to imagine there being that atheism. So this, I just say, has evidence of that's the case. I just wanted to read to you St. Augustine's comment on this particular verse. He says, he quotes it, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. For not even have certain sacrilegious and abominable philosophers who entertain perverse and false notions of God dared to say there is no God." Right? And it's like, even, horribly wrong philosophers, they haven't even said this. Therefore, it hath said in his heart. So, in his heart. So Augustine's saying, nobody thinks there isn't a God, right? Again, modern atheism is impossible in Augustine's time period, right? So Augustine says, so since we all know that you can't actually believe there is no God, I mean, everybody believes there's a God, what is going on here? And so he lands on the phrase, in his heart. For no one dares to say it, even if he has dared to think it. Now, I find that fascinating. Now, Augustine, being the genius that he is, in a sense, Augustine can admit that hypothetically, he could see it be possible to think that there might not be a God. I find that absolutely fascinating. It's like, of course, no one would say that. No one would say that. But it's like he can, Augustine, even in the 4th century, Augustine can already see that there is a philosophical possibility that could be said. Nevertheless, for no one dares to say it, even if he is dared to think it. They are corrupt and become abominable in their affections. That is, whilst they love this world and love not God. So for him, it's the substitute for God. In a sense, what's in the place of God is fleshly life and power, right? The wicked person who commits a corrupt and abominable acts is someone who is in the grips of is power mad. And their true God, in a sense, although they might acknowledge that there is a God, their true God that they worship is actually their own power and sins. Erica.
Mm-hmm.
The structure of this psalm is strikingly different because you're not seeing someone talking directly to God. It's more like an analysis or a description of the effects of godlessness, but it's not a direct appeal to God as the other ones are.
Yes, you're right. So this is so that's why I really wanted to get to this and not give it, because it is a different tack, isn't it? It's on in a sense, the provocation is the same because we have a problem, which is wickedness, corrupt and abominable acts that go unpunished. But this one takes the tack so it says, this is what's going on. The fool says in their heart, there's no God. But then, what do we get in verse 2?
Mm-hmm.
Whose perspective are verses 2 and 3 from?
Mm-hmm. From God.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's the God's eye view. That's right. It's a God's eye view now. And so that's what makes this psalm particularly fascinating and illuminating, because the psalmist here, in a sense, tries to describe what we've been going through in all the other psalms very much from a human point of view, from the point of view of the innocent sufferer. Now the psalmist, in a sense, takes the point of view of God looking down on human suffering, and we hear God's lament. God's lament. Think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So the Lord looks down from heaven on humankind to see if there are any who are wise, who seek after God. And then we have a quote that's almost from God's own mouth. They have all gone astray. They are all alike perverse. There is no one who does good. No, not one. And so from kind of the God's point of view, it's not looking too good, right? So then what is the answer? So from God's point of view, then it shifts. The perspective shifts again in verse 4. What happens?
Mm-hmm.
It almost seems like he's saying they don't know who I am. They don't even know to ask for me.
Mm-hmm.
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 Right?
Mm-hmm.
Have they no knowledge, all the evil who eat up my peoples, they eat bread and do not call upon the Lord? Right. So I'm sorry. So in verse 5. So then it makes a shift in verse 5. So God's lament, kind of basically in verse 2, it introduces you to God's perspective and alerts you to the difference in viewpoint. And then verses 3 and 4, you have kind of God's speech. Now in verse 5, what happens?
Mm-hmm.
Consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Consequences, right? Good.
Yeah. Terror.
Terror. What else?
God's in company with the righteous. And,
Right. Yes. It is the response is Emmanuel. God is with us. Right. So this is the cry of the righteous. And so basically the response is that, in a sense, the roles will be reversed. That right now we're in terror because people who in a sense act, basically act without reference to God's own justice, commit corrupt and abominable acts, seem to be in charge, and there's no stopping them. And we're in terror. But God is with us. God is in the company of the righteous. And so in that acknowledgement of God's presence, a newfound power and strength is found, right, in that moment. You would confound the plans of the poor, meaning the wicked, but the Lord is their refuge. So that's the response. And then we get it's out of order from the typical lament. right? And so in verse 6b and forward, we get the out of order. What happens at the end?
It's that but pivot again into,
right? Or in a sense, we have it's a petition, right?
Mhm.
So this one, the petition comes, oh, that deliverance for Israel would come from Zion, right? When the Lord, and then the article of faith, when the Lord restores the fortunes of his people, Jacob will rejoice and Israel will be glad. So this one says the petition for the very end after the affirmation of faith, where again, typically in the structure you would have provocation, here's the problem, this is what we want you to do about it, and then the expression of faith or trust. And here we have this description of the problem, and then the petition saved for almost the very end for deliverance for Israel that would come from Zion. And so the restoration of the fortunes of his people, in a sense, that new creation is what the psalmist prays for here at the end. So again, Psalm 14 is a very different kind of lament, although it's classified. If you were to look at a list of all the individual laments of the Psalter, that 14 would be in it. But as you can see, there's so much variety and comprehensiveness about how the Psalter addresses the human condition. And there are 150 of these poems. And again, some of them are praise. I mean, there is good news, there's joy, and we remember that on Sundays mostly, as I've said. But Monday through Saturday, we're living life all the livelong day. And so as we live life in that day, that kind of day, we can come to these psalms that help us point towards the day that we celebrate on Sunday, the day in which we can live in in the perfect knowledge and experience of God's love for us and his victory over everything that would take us away from him and his love. It's just a great way to, in a sense, anchor ourselves. And the Psalms are the antidote to prosperity religion, And the psalmist isn't trying to be his best self. He's not living his best life now, but he has faith that God will give him a life better than the one that the wicked are procuring for themselves, for sure, but also a life better than one which he could provide for himself. So that's the mark of his trust. So